President Ford was scheduled to arrive in Texas today, where he'll be campaigning until Friday. The Texas presidential primary is on Saturday. His opponent in that primary, Ronald Reagan, is accusing Mr. Ford of giving away the Panama Canal, and Reagan is making some headway with that issue. Because it has become a political issue, we asked our reporter, Fred Francis, to go down to the canal and have a look for himself. And we asked Marilyn Berger of our Washington staff to look into the diplomatic background. Here are their reports, beginning with Francis in the canal zone.
Before the canal was built, most of the area was swampland, and the swamp belonged to the country of Colombia. The United States began construction after it helped what is now Panama break away from Colombia, and after it negotiated a one-sided treaty with Panama, which gave America rights to the canal forever. It took 10 years to build the canal. That was 62 years ago at a cost of $366 million. Today, America operates it as an international waterway. But the canal is largely an American convenience. Two-thirds of the cargo transported through the canal is going toward or coming from an American port. The Panamanians say the canal is an American colony. Its 634 square miles is surrounded by barbed wire top fence. Its administration building sits atop a hill in plantation-like splendor. Its 40,000 American residents, both military and civilian, enjoy a suburban lifestyle. On the other side of the fence, the Panamanians live as they have for half a century, on the fringe of American prosperity. The Panamanian people are determined to change that, to force America out of the zone. The power base for that effort is the leadership of a populist leftist dictator and the nation's 24,000 university students. Students have played a major role in the canal's recent history. They led the riots in 1964, which resulted in America's decision to negotiate a new treaty. Today, there is a great potential for anti-American student violence directed at the canal zone. But any violence would harden opposition in the United States to a new treaty. The Panamanian government is working full-time trying to control student unrest. So far, that effort has been successful. Militant students say they will wait until after the American presidential elections. But student leader Ricardo Lachman says if there is no treaty soon after the election, Panamanians will be ready to fight for the canal territory.
You can remember what the United States did to get rid of the pressure of England when you were a colony of England, and right now part of our country is a colony of yours. So that's, I think the people, when they really decide to be liberated, they'll get it anyhow.
The mood of the Panamanians is one of patience. It is now the Americans who are emotional when discussing the canal. Most Americans who live here now reluctantly believe the police jurisdiction of the canal zone and the operation of the canal itself will eventually be turned over to Panama. The dominant fear among canal zone federal employees is, what will happen to them?
What would you estimate the size of our arrest record file to be?
Don Delhomme works for the Canal Zone Police. Like the majority of Americans who are not near federal retirement age, Delhomme is nervous about his future. Delhomme has 8 years invested in the zone. His wife, Angie, is Panamanian. They have a comfortable middle-class existence. But now Delhomme doesn't know what to do. He feels the State Department is ignoring the welfare zone citizens in the negotiations, and he is angry.
I have got to feel that I have to count because I am the U.S. People like me are the U.S. And if I can be treated like this, is just pushed aside to make room for a better relationship with a foreign power, then it can be done elsewhere.
There are nearly 4,000 Americans like Delhomme who work in the canal zone, and they are often overlooked in political arguments over power and prestige. While they are angry, they are also realistic. Many of them are looking for jobs elsewhere because they feel it's just a matter of time before their jobs are taken over by Panamanians. Fred Francis, NBC News, the Panama Canal Zone.
This isn't the first time that Panama Canal negotiations have become entangled in domestic politics. The United States and Panama have been trying to negotiate a new treaty ever since 1964, when there were 3 days of rioting near the Canal Zone. No administration, Democrat or Republican, has argued that the United States owns the canal. In fact, by 1967, new treaties were completed, but they weren't ratified. First, there were elections in Panama, then a revolution. Then the United States was in the middle of its own 1968 election. General Omar Torrijos, president of Panama since the 1968 coup, has been patient. Torrijos did not expect treaty negotiations to be completed during this election year, and he does not take Ronald Reagan's campaign statements too seriously.
There is a candidate that gives him the impression that Cassius Clay writes his speeches for him.
The United States is still concerned about protecting its interests in the canal. More than 2/3 of the goods passing through the canal come from or go to American ports. And the canal does have strategic value. During the Vietnam War, there was heavy tonnage of war materiel moving through the waterway. Any new crisis probably would bring a comparable increase in traffic. So the United States is negotiating a way to turn the canal over to the Panamanians gradually, while assuring its continued operation and defense. Reagan has said we should not give away the canal, but the administration says it's fulfilling commitments made since 1964. The United States realized then it would have to work out a new treaty or be faced with continued disruption of the waterway. It is impossible to defend the canal against sabotage. So the United States decided to negotiate, and a lot more than the canal was at stake. The United States wanted to demonstrate that it wanted a policy of cooperation and not confrontation with Latin America. As far as the administration is concerned, it's not a question of if, but rather when and how to turn the canal over to the Panamanians. Marilyn Berger, NBC News, at the White House.
Despite its acknowledged strategic importance, there are some senior naval officers who say this about the canal. The Navy is more interested in the American road and rail network than the canal in terms of shipping supplies from coast to coast. And the capital ships of the U.S. Navy are too big to get through the canal. In any case, Ronald Reagan is making an issue of it, and some voters in the primaries have been listening. David Brinkley has been covering the primaries, and he has some